I hear that and some questions come to my mind. I think the first thing that the city needs, I don't talk about this on the show a lot, but I think it's time to talk about it. I believe strongly in this, but maybe others don't. Let's start looking at the evidence. Welcome to The Truth with Ari Goldkind. If you're watching this on YouTube later, you're going to see we're crowded into this room. If you're listening live on Radio Regent, we're going to have a very good time in this conversation today. I'm surrounded by three great guys involved in the arts today. This is not a male-centric thing. We'll have three women in on a future episode, but I wanted to have one of our shows dedicated to the arts and culture in Toronto. When I ran for mayor up until a month ago, I kept going to all these debates where people would talk about arts and culture, and I knew it was sort of a dog and pony show where people would go to all these communities and say arts and culture matter and we need to do something about it. And I said, this is a conversation that needs to continue because the arts and culture is what makes Toronto thrive. It's the reason, as I've said many times, people overpay to live in Toronto and why Toronto has such an affordable housing issue and all these other issues that are connected. But the arts and culture, to me, are what makes a city worth living in. I'm surrounded and joined in this room by people who have traveled the world. They know the world. They know what culture and arts brings. So we're going to spend the first 35 or 40 minutes talking about arts, culture, jobs, the economy when it comes to young artists who are trying to make their way in Toronto, all these issues that I'm passionate about, but we're also going to talk about the passion of my guest today. So in no particular order, let me tell everybody who's joining me today. Many of you might know Glen Baxter. Glen Baxter is one of them. I'm going to call you a man about town because that's why I look up to you, even though you're sitting about a foot below me right now.
I need like a telephone book to sit on.
That's right. So if you're listening to this live,
is
you can't imagine how awkward this looks. Glen, introduce yourself. I mean, I know you.
We're like a four-man band, like a folk band, and we're like crammed into this audio booth. And I have the lowest chair, and I'm looking up to everybody around me. But yeah, it's great to be here, and great introduction. I love your passion, Ari, and yeah, I mean, what you said was bang on.
So, Glen, you've been a fashion reporter for a big chunk of your life.
I've been in broadcasting for over 2 decades, and for over 10 years, I was an arts and entertainment on-air reporter and anchor on Much Music, and later on City TV. So I've covered the arts extensively in this city, from visual arts to performing arts to music to literature to anything, revolving around arts and culture. So, yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, because Glen and I have spent some time talking. Obviously, a lot of things get attention in the city. Movies get attention, television production gets attention, but visual arts, photography, all these other things that are just as important that young people should aspire to do, whether it be classical music, whether it be ballet, as I said, photography, fine arts. I have, when I look at this, these are things that unless you really get lucky or a lucky break, you're going to New York, you're going to another city, and I don't want our city to go the way of the dodo bird. Yeah. And it ties into what I said at the beginning, which is we need to do more as a city to not just talk about the bread and butter issues, which I'm not going to talk about with you guys today, which we spent a lot of time on this show talking about: transit, housing, taxes. That's not for today, but it's about the fabric of what makes a city livable, which is what attracts people here besides our housing bubble and immigration. Manny Neubacher, event organizer, curator, artist. Introduce yourself for 2 seconds to people who aren't familiar with you.
I'm Manny Neubacher. I've been in the arts community most of my life. Both my parents were artists. I opened my first gallery about 20 years ago. I also spent a lot of time on air for Rogers, doing the arts reporting. So I've had a chance to meet with lots of curators, lots of directors, lots of artists, and interview them about their craft, about their practice. So I'm a big advocate of the Canadian art scene. I believe Toronto has the potential. The talent is here, and I think it's just about sort of nurturing it and to make it expand and get bigger.
Take it to the next level.
Yes.
We've heard that before. And what I'll say is this: Mary, you said this, and I'm going to ask you all as we go around the table in a second, is to say, given what you've said, what are the things that the city is not doing that if you threw your name in the ring and you were involved in planning and you were involved at City Hall about making some changes that would allow growth in the arts community, not the high-end Toronto Life cover, but where people need to live and afford apartments. I'm going to go around the table. We're going to talk. That's one of the things I want to talk about today. Last but not least, Darcy, Killeen. I'm pronouncing that correctly.
That's correct.
And you are you are affiliated with Scotiabank and have a really exciting project that you're involved with that I wanted to talk to you about. Why don't you explain it to people who don't know?
Excellent. I am the executive director of the Scotiabank Contact Photography Festival.
The largest photography festival
In
the
the
world.
Being very modest, everybody. Being very modest.
With the massive support of Scotiabank, a great corporate sponsor. But I come to the art world. I've skirted and danced with it for many, many years. I come from it from the business world, from being a Wall Street trader to being a CFO on Bay Street. But always tried to give back to the cultural world, the cultural community, by working on different boards, by supporting artists. And 10 years ago, I decided to give up the financial world entirely and devote my life to and it's been just about contact. It's been growing this phenomenal festival.
Because it pays more.
Oh, it pays. It's unbelievable.
It's funny. I'm going to interrupt you all. You wouldn't know this if you're listening to this on the radio or the podcast. I just made a note about something that I was going to ask in about 30 seconds.
Phone mom?
No, not phone mom, but not easy. And Glen, the question that's going to come up is how can you make a living in the arts in these days, which I think is a really important question for people who are passionate the way you said you gave up 10 years ago. So Glen, you blurted out something funny. It's like,
that's like the question, what's the meaning of life?
Well, that's deep.
There is no answer.
The word passion was used, and I think that's the most important word when you're talking about artists, because it is their passion, and they will do it fail or succeed, they will do it at all cost because they can't imagine themselves doing anything else, whether it's fashion design or visual arts. They are passionate about what they do, and if they make money at it, great. If they don't, I mean, that's what they're born to do.
I think
That's
what they pursue. The biggest problem about actually following that field is it is the lowest amount of money that you can make. Even a recent study about graduates, people
and some of it has a shelf life. Like if you're a dancer, whether you're a contemporary dancer or a ballet dancer, I mean, what's the longevity? What do you do when you're 35, right?
Exactly.
If you're a painter or sculptor, you can do that until you're dead and buried. But for a lot of artists who pursue their dreams, I mean, not only are they at the low end of the income ladder, but they also have a very short shelf life.
Like a Bachelor of Fine Arts, the average salary of a Bachelor of Fine Art graduate is $37,000 a year. So it's at the very bottom of all of the other degrees. So it is passion. Mm-hmm. It is a passion that fuels it, and it's the only reason that people do it, because it's not about the money. It'd be nice if it was about the money, and that's an average, which means you're talking. Some people are it's borderline, right?
And I think it different, in other cities, there are artists that do make a lot of money around the world. I think, if you look at Toronto exclusively, I think when I look at this, when you told me about today's event, I was thinking of the big picture, and it's by saying that, Toronto, we need a massive focus on culture. Like, we support culture. There's people that do things that are here and there. But, if you think of New York City, the reason people go to New York City is not because of Central Park. It's because of the Met. It's because of the plays. It's because of, the big museums. It's the Met. It's the
Broadway.
Roma. And Broadway. These are the reasons. Like, it's about culture. Culture is what makes New York the center of the universe. Right. Yeah. And we have it to a certain extent here. We are getting there. We're starting to build the infrastructure. We're starting to build the buildings. But we have so much further to go. And once we do embrace that, then we have that that social net to support artists, which we presently don't have. And some artists make money, but...
As well, and I think the other thing as well is that to build it as a world-class art city, it can happen. Like, everyone has that power. Like, every businessman has that power to go out and buy a painting from a young artist. And it starts at the lower level. Like, if artists are actually making money, they're producing more work. The more work they're producing, the more people that are buying. It starts to create from the bottom up. So you can come down from the government, like that trickles down that way. But you can also buy it from the beginning. Buy young artists.
If I think of just like Contact, the Photography Festival as an example,
the largest in the world.
We support 1,500.
He's paid you to say that every time he says that, right?
We support 1,500 artists on an annual basis, and it's a phenomenal thing to do. But when I first came to Contact, the model was there, but the model wasn't working that well. It was historically funded by government to a large extent, and then also funded by the people that support it, the board of directors, by just writing big fat checks to support this festival. And it was basically looking at the business and saying, for this to sustain and grow, it needs a new funding source. And so just like you're saying, Manny, by saying it's the businesses, Contact went to the business community and changed its model going towards corporate sponsorship. And it's the corporate sponsors that are footing the majority of the growth at Contact. We went from having 10 10% support in sponsors, now to 60, 70%.
Yeah.
And that was a way of looking at the model. But like I say, Contact is very fortunate that we've been able to thrive in this environment.
Yes.
But it's been by constantly looking at that model. And I think it's that social net that supports the artists.
What that does for the city of Toronto is immeasurable. I mean, for those who aren't familiar with Contact, we've mentioned it's the largest. I mean, there's over, 300 shows in various venues across the city of Toronto, from cafes to restaurants to galleries. And it combines some of the top photographers and artists in Canada, in Toronto, and in the world, along with amateur shutterbugs who are just showing their work for the first time in cafes and stuff. So it's very democratic. Yep. It's spread all across the city. There's public art that everybody can enjoy. A lot of people have seen some of these these works of art, and maybe not even know that it's part of your annual photography festival that happens all month of May every year. I mean, I love that event.
And so many people have traveled to town, and there's so much income that actually produces for Toronto.
We know that we have, we're bringing in about $10 million in tax dollars every single year by doing the festival. I wish that the city would turn around and repay an investment of a few more dollars.
$1 million back.
Yeah, so let's give it back.
So on that note, let's get to what you did. Let's follow from that. Let's get to some
But
questions.
Toronto benefits from that event, right?
It does
because
benefit.
it's spread out all over the city.
And any
it's
tourists coming to
everywhere.
Toronto are like, wow,
you don't
what a
have
cool
to
city,
pay money.
right?
Yeah, you don't have to buy a
So
ticket or
here's-
be rich to enjoy it. It's so beautiful.
So help me understand this then, because you guys all know that there's a certain percentage of the taxes that are devoted to arts and culture spending in Toronto. I'm sure you're all familiar with this, and I'm sure you're all familiar with, and for people listening at home, the amount that Montreal, for example, spends on arts and culture.
Well, I think
know where I'm going with this,
Toronto's
obviously.
like $22 per capita
That's
spent
right.
on that, and in Montreal it's 47, and in Vancouver it's 55.
And
We're
so
at the bottom of the barrel.
And so here's the thing.
And don't get me started about fashion.
Well, we're going to talk about but
talking about funding and support from levels of government. Quebec is ahead than Ontario.
And there was
in
a
this.
really interesting article in the Post a couple weeks ago about socialites and the wealthy. Do you know what I'm talking about? So I might want to talk about that. But back to the per capita. Montreal and Vancouver and other cities, particularly in Europe, they recognize that when you spend that money, it's money that's not flushed down the toilet the way in this city, because of the idiot brothers, we have this idea that when you spend money in taxes, it gets flushed down the
When
toilet.
you say idiot brothers, are there like subtitles on the screen?
No, people know. People know. So people know. They know I don't hold back. So, and there's this idea that if you spend money through your taxes, it just goes into a big black hole and disappears. Other cities throughout the world are realizing that for every dollar,
It's called investment.
There's a
it's
multiplier,
correct.
right?
The multiplier, and it's not a multiplier of 1 to 2. It actually, and you got, if you wanted to comment on this, the multiplier is much more significant. Not just dollars and cents, but quality of life.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, if it was just about saving taxpayers' dollars, you could put me at City Hall with no political
That's right.
experience or no business savvy whatsoever.
Are you making fun of me?
No, no. I'm just
Okay.
saying, the name of the game was just saving tax dollars, right?
Yes.
And looking out for the taxpayer and just saving tax dollars. Put me in office, I'll save the city more than $1 billion. I'll save the city $5 billion. We'll be in bad shape in a few
Right.
months. We might crumble in a couple of years. But if it's just saving money, I'll just save
The
it. I'll
Detroiting-
close everything down and save everything.
The
right?
Detroiting of Toronto,
But
which
you have
is
to
what
have
the
vision,
Republicans
and you
have done.
have to invest in your city in order for your city to
It
be
comes down
competitive.
to
and
what
to
kind of
thrive.
city do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a city that has a strong
warm, hot city that
culture
doesn't have this
base,
cold
where you
weather?
can
That's right.
go out to
You're on a- going on a
openings,
trip, aren't you?
where you can go out to openings, where you can see theater, where you can see all these amazing things and take part in these performances.
So let's talk about that. So we have
and
three.
attracts people who will come
and
in.
attract people
and buy
that will
tickets.
fly in.
There's
Yes.
so let's get potentially serious for a second, potentially, because there is a disconnect in this city. I'm in this room. There are 4 people in this room, 5 if you include our wonderful videographer, who believe in the arts, okay, and believe that the value doesn't really need to be explained. It's self-evident. But you guys all know that we now live in a city where Doug Ford came in a very close second with a massive amount of votes. And that applies to this conversation. Why? And I want to have 3 different answers from it. Because you have a city where you have hundreds of thousands of people who may be in Scarborough, who may be in Etobicoke, who may be in North York, and they hear us talking, and they'll be, they're talking about their artsy-fartsy...
We're elitists.
Elitists, and all these words that last time I checked, if I had a kid and I'm happily child-free, but if I had a child, I would want my child to grow up to be an elite. I would not aspire to have my child be anything other than that. So that dirty word has become interesting. But How, in your experience, given that, Darcy, you have to go out and pound the pavement. Manny, you know this world. Glen, you're out every day watching people thumb their nose or not take what you do as a serious thing. Whereas if you were talking about movies in Hollywood North, the connection is easier in people's mind to make, well, there's trucks on the street, there are hotel rooms and all this. How do you get people who see this conversation and go, this is really artsy-fartsy?
It's funny because I know that some of the funding that that they were sort of getting rid of is actually at the lower level, which is in schools. And that's a really big problem as far as the arts themselves, the drawing, the dance, all of those things. They actually add to critical thinking. They actually make business people smarter.
Such a good point.
And it's so ridiculous that it gives you a look into other worlds. It gives you a look into the bigger picture. It gives you a look into. Typically artists were the first ones that were dismantled whenever a regime came into power because there was power in arts. They would look at the world in a certain way, and they would basically say, "Hey, this is what's going on, and
we need to shut it down.
We need to shut it down." Right? So it's so important on every single level. You cannot have blinders on and just thinking in one direction. Economics can't be just about numbers and about this and about that. It needs to be all these other influences need to come in because it just sort of then stirs it up and it makes you think.
It's not just a balance sheet.
It makes you think, yeah. And it's so important. So when people say, "Oh, it's artsy-fartsy, it's elitist," I think it's bullshit. I think those things are really important to the way that we think and to increase our ability to take in information in a way that you can process it and work with it.
And it's funny because I'd go around the city, and then Glen, Darcy, I want you to weigh in on this. I'd go around the city and I would talk to people about this because we'd put out arts policy, and people would look and they'd Google, they'd be on their phone, they'd go, arts, I can't get around in traffic. My taxes are too high because the Fords tell me it, and I'd be like, well, wait a minute. Do you want your kid to have a piano lesson? Oh, yeah. If I could afford piano, I'd send my kid in a. Do you want your kids to take arts? Do you want your kids to learn to draw? Well, then, now this conversation is no longer artsy-fartsy. Glen?
And that's a great point. You want the best for your kids, but you also want the best for your city. Yeah. Do you want to be held back, or do you want to move forward? Do you want to be in the same conversation as some of the cultural capitals of the world? We don't talk negatively about Paris or New York. We look up to these cities. Right. We admire these cities. When we go and spend some time vacationing in some of these cities, we're in awe. Well, we could have some of that too. Mm-hmm. Let's invest in our cultural industry and our arts, and not to mention what you were saying about with our children. We want them to be well read. We want them to if they can play the piano, then they can play the piano. If they excel in sports, then they play sports. We want them to have all kinds of opportunity, and it's all part of the conversation.
And
we're
the
having
quality
today.
as well, because if you're supporting the arts on the upper levels, the kids and everyone around, they're seeing this and they're like, good quality art versus bad quality art as well, because it's a lot of it's getting funded and a lot of it's growing, and it's like, wow. So to know the difference between what was good and bad is so
and when we're
important
talking on a larger scale, like with film production or the fashion industry or anything else like that, that brings in money to the provincial economy, to the GTA, and that money is our money. It's saving taxpayers' dollars. It's coming in from the outside, and that benefits everybody living here.
So Darcy, following up about money, let's talk about money because everything always comes down to money. But for me, this is not just a balance sheet issue. Your festival takes place where? Location-wise, physical location.
Everywhere throughout Toronto.
Okay, so if it's in Toronto, because for me, I live at Spadina in St. Clair. So my Toronto would be sort of south of St. Clair. I can go to the AGO. Yep. I can go to a Mervish Theatre. I can go to Ossington. Yep. I can go to any one of the smaller. I can go to Manny's Gallery. What do you find that people are coming from sort of suburban Mississauga, Brampton, Thornhill, Richmond Hill, or are people living there sort of outside of the arts bubble? And if they are, how do you pop that bubble to say, hey, the entire city is available to you?
I was just about to say, if I sit on the other side of the fence, a lot of people did vote. In my neighborhood, all we saw was Olivia Chow signs. So you would think that she was going to win 99% of the votes.
Right.
And that's just the way it was. And turns out, on election day, I was very nervous. And I think out of respect to all those people that voted, these people are very important, residents of the Greater Toronto Area as well. So I think, we have to, on this side of the fence, prove that making the investment makes sense and making it work. So one thing that Contact does is, not many people, not everybody goes to galleries. 35% of Ontarians go to galleries. They find it very difficult to go into this white space. They don't have the time. There's no
Is
need
it
for
that
them.
high? Because I wouldn't have guessed it was anywhere close to 35.
Well, just go in once a year, just once a
Right,
year.
okay.
But like they can't afford to buy the art, so they don't do it. So we do outreach. We'll go up there and do outside large public installations that have millions and millions of impressions during the month. We go out there, we make the reach to try to bring people down here because the majority of the exhibitions are here. But if I think about it, I just don't think it's a matter of all of a sudden City Hall is going to wake up and say, oh yeah, it's 18, we're making it 50 tomorrow, and that's the answer. The way that I look at it, and it's if you think of the way the church is changing, although the church is changing so quickly, it just takes years for these institutions to change. For the arts institution and culture in Canada to be supported like it is in Europe and other places, let's just look at the AGO. The AGO, 10 years ago was fine. Now, I attribute it to Matthew Teitelbaum. The guy's a genius. If you go back to the first big show, the Abstract Expression show, he's had one home run after the other. He's attracting an audience from around the world, getting international attention. And I think that is the seed and the catalyst to get everybody to change so that City Hall can see, look what the AGO is doing. And they're doing it all on their own, and they're making this happen. And, well, maybe we need to support the ROM a little bit more. Then the ROM can get off their feet because they're having a hard time, going through times. But the ROM is one of the least funded public institutions in the world. And they need that initial support and that help. But I think, people like myself and like Manny and like Glen, we're out there trying to give arts and culture that presence that will slowly build the catalyst for the investment to come from everywhere.
So if you're talking about the ROM and the AGO, let's say there's somebody listening who's a young artist, 21, 22, 25, 17.
Yep.
They're sort of under the radar. They have a dream. Glen, you talked about this as we started the show. They have a passion. They don't want to go be a lawyer. They don't want to go be a doctor. They don't want to be an accountant. And
Yep.
Good for them. How do they get more involved in this conversation or find their way in a city that when I talk to artists, and you're here, this is proof that this is a subject, it's door after door closed in your face, whether it be grants, whether it be access to grants, whether it be something very not centralized so they don't know where to go, or is the answer anything that's worth achieving in life requires hard work and the cream will rise to the top, and that's the way it works.
I think with young artists, the one thing that I always say to them is you have to be part of the community. So one thing good about art openings is they're open to everyone. So you can go to any gallery and you can put your name on the list, and they'll send you an email, and you'll know when the opening's happening. You can go and you can have a drink, you can look at some art, you can talk with other artists, you can talk with other professionals. And you start to become part of the scene of what's happening. So as a young artist, you need to know what's happening in your community. You need to know what's happening around you. You need to go to these openings. You need to meet people. And that's how it works, right? So you slowly meet people. You start to understand. There you're showing your work to some friends, some other artists. You start to get together. You collaborate.
It's such a supportive environment.
And it's such a small little community in Toronto. But I think if you show that you want to be part of the community, then it starts to slowly unfold and open.
Does that community have a voice? Does that community have an organized voice, or is it a bunch
called
of
social media?
No, but I call it anti-social media, by the way, if you look at my Twitter feed. But in any event...
I don't.
No. But in any event, my question is really, so many things. If you talk about transit, you know who to call, who's going to be the person leading the charge, whether it be the union side, management side. Does arts suffer in any way from sort of a lack of a cohesive body to say, wake up, we're here, we're a big block of votes, we're a big block of Torontonians, or am I way off the mark there?
I guess the Canada Arts Council are the biggest force, I guess, right?
But see, I see you guys, and you can't. If you're listening to this, you're not going to see it. But I see eyes sort of looking around, and
no, I don't. I think to become a successful artist, you might as well say, I'm going to try to form the next Rolling Stones. It's a very difficult thing to do.
Right.
There are only a few successful artists in every city around the world. It's not a Toronto thing. It's a very difficult thing. So I think when you go into this, whether you want to become a dancer, a photographer, a painter, a sculptor, whatever it is, I think they all know going into this is a very difficult field, and I will be making certain compromises. But at the end of the day, this is from my perspective, I learned something very early in life on Wall Street, is you earn every single penny you make. I made a lot of money when I worked on Wall Street. I lost it all, but I was going to die down there from working there. And that was the price I was paying. For every extra dollar, I was giving up a year of my life. And I decided to give that all up for the arts.
Right.
And, I think you have to realize this, and you have to realize this early in life, and you have to be able to make those sacrifices, and it's a very difficult challenge.
I studied journalism at Ryerson. I'm from Montreal, and that's why I ended up here. That's why I came to Toronto. And I remember we had a guest speaker, and at that age when you have guest speakers, no matter who it is, you're always in awe of them. And it was a journalist from the Globe and Mail. And I'll never forget what he said. I forget his name, but he said, get ready to eat craft dinner for the rest of your life.
Right.
You're going into journalism, and but I can't add. I'm not going to Wall Street, so that was my calling in life. But yeah, I've never owned a car. I mean, I live well, but I mean, you follow your passion, and that applies, and I think for any artist.
Do you believe? Okay, so I'm going to ask you a sort of a bizarre question that touches upon the arts in Toronto. But I had this discussion with somebody the other day, and I thought their answer didn't leave me all that satisfied. So let me throw it out there. Glenn and I have friends in common. Okay, same world, that King Street, Portland, Brant Street world. And I have friends that and they're really smart people. Like,
Is that a world or a province?
I don't know. I call it Freedville.
It's a suburb, I think, isn't
In
it?
any event. But I'm going to ask you a serious question because, again, it's nice to talk about these things, but unless people are willing to go in their wallets and to buy art from you, Manny, and to go to your festival, and Glenn to go to Fashion Week and support
Just hang
you
out with me.
and hang out with you.
Buy me a beer.
Well, okay, that's easy. But what I find a lot now in this city, it's the last 5, 10 years. Glenn, this is getting very deep. Getting very deep.
What's your phone number?
People are very inclined when they have a certain amount of income between 25 and I'd say 45. They will go to one of the many nightclubs in Toronto, and they will buy bottle service, which to me is still the most asinine thing I've ever heard in my life, and I enjoy the scene, but I think it's just asinine. But the bill will come at the end of the night, and the bill will be $300, $400, $500, and they're dropping that like it's $20. You go to the Symphony, to Roy Thompson Hall. You go to the Four Seasons Center. If I'm lucky enough to be given tickets, I'm emphasizing this, lucky enough to be given tickets. Everybody in that room that I'm seeing, by and large, is over the age of 60 or 70. The symphony, ballet, classic, these are
excluding the students, right? There's
excluding
always the group of
students,
students
and they're
who are
sitting
there.
way up high.
Yep.
And so my question is, and I know this doesn't touch exactly on, but to me there's a bigger picture here. How do you get people who are not broke, who have disposable income, to go to these things that may be dying out in a city?
It's a funny thing too, because I used to, go to a lot of these shows, and I would take people to contemporary dance, which is at the bottom of the popularity totem pole, and or I would try to get somebody to join me because I really loved it, and they would say, "Oh, I went to see a modern dance piece and I hated it," and it's like, well, don't rule it out. Don't rule out the opera because you went to one opera and didn't like it. Don't rule out the ballet because you went to one performance and it wasn't your cup of tea. When people go to the cinema and they see a lousy comedy or some bad movie, they don't rule out movies and the cinema. Oh, I saw a movie once, it just sucked, right? You really
That's actually clever.
But you have to develop a taste for it, an appreciation for it, and you have to give it a chance. And it doesn't mean just go to one show. And if you like that show, then you may come back.
John, let me ask you this.
Let me follow up on that.
Please.
Well, one thing that's amazing is actually, to answer your question, is there are amazing groups out there. Like AGO has Next. So it's all for younger people that are interested in learning.
Friday night.
They're interested in learning about art. The Ensemble Circle is for the COC, the Canadian Opera Company. And that allows younger people that have an interest but don't necessarily know exactly, and it becomes more of a social thing as well. So what it is it creates a social hub. People all want to learn. They want to go to the opera, but they may not know that much about it.
These institutions throw amazing annual galas that a lot of young professionals in this city buy tickets to.
And being part of that group, then you start to really feel like you're a part of something.
But I have a skepticism to that, and I'll tell you why. Because I love these events because
of the women.
Okay, you said it.
Yep.
Okay, fine. So, good. I didn't say it. Fine. So, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's just, okay, I'm going to have to say it now because it really is unbelievable. And Glenn and I went to Fashion Week 2 weeks ago, and I
took Ari to his first fashion show.
Right. It was
I think
unbelievable.
It was a life-changing
experience. It was a life-changing experience.
We were supposed to see one show at 4:30 in the afternoon. 7.5 hours later, Ari, go home.
That's true. Anyway, so you talked about the Friday night at the ROM. I know there's a thing at the AGO. These are very singles-oriented or meeting and mixing. To me, we live in an attention span challenge. You walk down the street, if you're not walking into 6 people while you're on your phone, you're lucky. How, given what you've said about these things at the ROM and the AGO, which there's still people there, they're singles mixers, they're on their phone, they're texting, sexting, and all this. How in this day and age, and I'm worried that it's gone. I'm worried that it's gone and not coming back. that to say to somebody our age or younger, I mean, I'm 40 now, so I have to go younger, I still feel young, but to a 28-year-old, turn your phone off, sit there for 3 hours listening to an opera in Italian. Am I wrong that that ship has completely sailed for that generation?
I think you're wrong.
Well, tell me why. I mean, I'm happy to be wrong.
I think you're cutting them short, and I think that there's a lot of people that have a passion for it. But let's face it as well. The ticket price is pretty hefty.
Yes.
You mentioned bottle service. I mean, that's also a very small demographic of people who can afford to do that. And maybe you see them do that, but maybe they do it once a year on their birthday. Like it's not a weekly thing. But however people spend their money, I think that when you are talking about the COC, the Canadian Opera Company, or the ballet or the symphony, I mean, these are high-ticket items. You could also move it down to King Street, where you have the entertainment district and all of the musical theater, which is a little more catered to the masses and it's crowd-pleasing. But when you're looking to buy that one ticket, it's not affordable, I think, for the masses.
So let's talk about the masses. Darcy, your festival, I asked you about being downtown. Manny, your gallery is where?
It's in Parkdale, so Queen and Brock.
All right, so let me ask you this, because again, this conversation, again, you could hear certain people going, oh, this is what they talk about south of the 401. Could you make the living that you make if your gallery or your festival was at Highway 7 in East Beaver Creek? I'm going to say not a chance in the world.
It's a totally different thing. You'd have to sell an entirely different thing. Absolutely, I agree.
So if we're talking about city building and broadening this into the sort of New York way, because if you go to Manhattan, you go to Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, a little less so, but they'll take a ferry to go do the things, whether it's Broadway or not. I mean, the Christmas season coming up, it's a lot of locals, it's not just tourists. How at East Beaver Creek and Highway 7, I'm just making that up, how at Jane and Finch, these are arts deserts. Like if you're raising children there and you're on the poverty line or below the poverty line, you have very little access to things. I'm not talking, Glenn, as you said, the COC high ticket. What can be done outside of the realm or the area that us four live in?
Well, it's all about, it's about supporting there. And it's just like, like I said, it's like this city needs a massive shift towards culture. So let's just go back to school. These kids, how often is music cut from the curriculum now?
Yeah.
It's just like gone. Okay, we can't do that. It's cut. So therefore they lose that passion right off the bat.
Right.
And if I think of Contact, I think we could survive in any different place. I think the model would have to change, but we could survive and we could thrive in any different environment. One thing we did, working with an agency up north, Shoot With This. It's a group that tries to get people to stop shooting with guns and start shooting with cameras. And
that's actually clever.
We worked with them for a couple of years, and we always had the students go out and shoot work, and then we would show it downtown. And the last time we did a big show was at the Plaza of Scotiabank Tower, a beautiful, beautiful space. And we invited all the parents and everybody to come down, and it was a very emotional, powerful event, but very difficult. And a lot of the parents couldn't come because they couldn't afford the taxi. They didn't want to go all the way downtown. Right. This is,
they had other kids to take care of.
Exactly. They got these things. So last year what we did was we decided we would take their images and we would get billboards up in their neighborhood, up at Jade and Finch, and put on billboards all their artwork. So we took these kids' images, put them up on billboards, massive size and scale, and now the parents and the grandparents and the cousins and the uncles and the neighbors could go outside and say, that's Jimmy's work right there. Right. Like Jimmy did that. And now Jimmy is now going to university at Ryerson to study, photography. And these are the things, and these are the models. And this was an investment that Contact made. Like it was a decision that myself and my staff and my board made, that we were going to take this money and spend it and support this initiative to try to outreach there and support them.
So it sounds to me that you're able to do that because you have backing. You have the backing of a big corporate sponsor.
Well, they created the backing. Originally, Contact, when it started, was a group of photographers.
He's hustled. He's pursued it.
This is what I'm saying.
No, but it's not easy. Scotiabank is a phenomenal sponsor of the festival, but I'm also working with 49 other sponsors.
Right.
So it's actively searching money.
They don't own Contact. Contact is its own entity that was started.
But backing is critical.
Sponsor.
Oh, it's a totally critical.
So here's a question for each three, because we're going to wrap up in 5 minutes, and I want to get to some personal plugs and passions of your guys before we wrap up. Let's say the city was to back this. Let's say this conversation, and I guess my question would be, if I were mayor, I would do X. So let's say we were looking at the state of arts and culture 4 years from now, and there were some measuring sticks. Because again, I don't want this conversation or this issue to be so esoteric that you don't know what you're measuring. 4 years from now, What would be some measurable signs of success for you if the city did X or Y? Let's start with you, Darcy.
I think it goes right back to that per capita expenditure, you know. I think so. It's increasing taxation to increase the amount of investment we make in arts and culture. I think that is the number one thing. It's the easiest thing to quantify. It's the easiest thing to measure. But again, you know, we know that we have half of the city that would support something like that and half of it that would not.
Right.
So we have to get to a point. So it's about making, you know, educating, investing, and moving that number forward.
And Manny, you were talking about that at the beginning.
I think it's really important, yeah. But you can't measure it in 4 years sometimes, but it's definitely something that needs to happen, for sure. And some of it is, you can't necessarily measure it, but you can see the difference. You can see
like an example is one of Contact's biggest, you know, sister festivals is in Madrid. It's massive in size and scope. Well, it's the same size as Contact, but, you know, internationally recognized, it's so big. Its budget is 15 times the size of Contact, and it's pretty much fully funded by the government. And 1% of all corporate taxation dollars goes towards supports arts and culture.
Funded by the
Blank
government
check.
in Spain?
Yeah.
Even with austerity measures throughout, because that's an important fact. I mean,
It's diminishing, but it's still substantial. But it's, you know, we're talking, you know, tens of millions of euros to support this initiative. And it's funded by the government. It's a blank check they get every
so
single
they
year.
realize, even with belts being tightened and budgets,
That
and
they
all
have
this,
to do this.
that they have
This
to
is
do
what's
it.
driving the, this
That's
is what's
actually
driving
really
people there.
interesting, because if you read about Greece and Italy and Spain
Yeah.
and what's going on,
Now, it's like I say, it is being reduced. It is. It's not. You know, they're not. The numbers aren't going up. But
the
it's
reason
still
there's
there.
any money being pumped in the first place into this is because it's a revenue-generating event. I mean, it brings in money to the country, to the city, right? So you're investing.
I know
you're getting money back from your
I
investment.
don't know a lot of people in this room, but I know 20 people personally that go to Madrid every single year and spend a week there.
hotels, food. I mean,
Everything.
I never understand why this is so lost on our city.
We're talking about government spending. We haven't spoken about the fashion industry and our fashion designers in this city, something that I've covered for over a decade now. And we're one of the only places, I think, that doesn't get any kind of federal support. Quebec recognized the fashion industry as a cultural industry and gave it some funding. And I think employment doubled in less than a year. The provincial government funds books, magazines. They fund television and film production, digital media and music recording, but they refuse to recognize the fashion industry as a cultural industry. So our talented designers who are trying to compete on the world stage are falling short and are barely surviving because they're not getting the financial boost that could help them propel their brand and their name further.
And you and I at Fashion Week, so let's talk more about this. And I know that you're very passionate about this.
50,000 jobs. The fashion industry employs 50,000 people in Toronto alone, in the GTA.
But like one of Toronto's
50,000
most
jobs.
successful designers, just decides to leave the industry. He was like our Jimi Hendrix, and he just leaves because he just can't make it happen. Like,
And is
it's
this
just,
who you and I were talking
you
about?
know what I'm talking about?
Jeremy?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
just
Jeremy
makes you
Lang,
want to
right?
cry.
So
Jeremy, yeah,
Like, it
Jeremy.
makes you want to cry. Like that
Exactly.
guy is,
so much talent,
he's
so
a
much
god,
promise,
and now done.
and he just couldn't make a go of it because the business is so difficult. And he was showing in New York, and he was recognized as one of Canada's most talented designers. Lita Bidet, also more established. She had, I think, a 3-decade-old career. She had to call it quits and pack it in. It's a very tough industry. You have a better chance of being a rock star coming out of Canada than a fashion designer. I could name you dozens and dozens of rock bands and singers who are known all over the world. Our fashion models do very well around the world, but our designers are struggling, and they are so talented.
But let me play devil's advocate to that, because I always think about somebody listening and somebody watching going, yeah, well, it's fashion and it's worn by these rich
It's an
women.
industry. We wear T-shirts. It doesn't have to be.
This is
well,
my
I'm not
point.
talking about the Armanis and the Chanels.
So make the case when because you're talking about Jeremy. I even knew you were talking about Jeremy Lang. There was a Joffer K. And you just talked about. Make the case to somebody who's listening to this and going, what the hell do I give a crap about this for? Why should they give a crap about what you're saying? Because I know once you explain it makes complete sense.
I'll jump in front of Glenn, but it goes back to just like tourism dollars and tourism traveling. I lived in New York for a long time, and Fashion Week was one of my favorite things. And like the city was just taken over. It was incredible.
Alive.
The buzz was amazing. It was like, it's like we have TIFF here, and TIFF has the sex appeal, and here we have the fashion appeal, but they just decide no.
Yeah, I mean, people ask us why we can't be in the same conversation as New York, Paris, London, and Milan, the 4 capitals. You know that in Italy and in France, they have their own minister of fashion, whose job it is to just look over the fashion industry, to boost the fashion industry, to make it competitive around the world. That creates job, that brings in money. That's a good thing.
So today the headline news, and then we'll do some plugs. Is I know that some of you know the person who was brought into court today that has a helicopter following him, and I've never seen a mob scene like it in my life. Somebody very involved prominently in the arts and culture and the show Q. I'm obviously talking about Jian Ghomeshi. I've had calls all day asking about it. Glen, you've been around this world. Any comments on what's going on? You can or you can't, but I just think I'd be remiss, given that there's probably a drone somewhere over downtown over his lawyer's office. Literally, there's a drone. I'm being serious. Following it. You've known him. Any comments, gentlemen? Or are you just all zipping it?
You're the criminal lawyer. You're the criminal lawyer.
I think this is all horror. The entire situation is a horrible situation.
Yeah.
I think the only good that's going to come out of this is, and I think this is what the media's picked up on a lot, is this. Finally, there's attention that's coming to this, and I think this could be one of the great things for, for humankind, that we're finally dealing with this issue and bringing it to the surface. And it's terrible that something bad had to happen like this, but. Right. Maybe that's the good side of it.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. I mean, there is a conversation now going on about sexual harassment, about equality, and these are all positive things.
Will this have any effect? I'm not sure it will. I mean, CBC obviously has been talked about a lot, and I just see CBC always cutting and cutting and cutting. Does this delegitimize further, these kinds of institutions, these kinds of shows, or is it really an outlier? And
no, I think
it is what it is.
It's a personal thing.
That's what I mean.
And it's his own demons that he's sort of dealing with. The CBC shouldn't be held accountable for what someone does outside of it, because the show actually was good. The show that he actually.
Yeah, but how much
how much do they know?
How much do you know, and how much do you credit him for the success of the show? Right. I mean, there's been lots of stuff that's been written about that show and how the role of the producers that were involved, and the criticism to the CBC that they didn't provide a safe working environment and a fair working environment. You have someone who has a 20-foot picture of himself on the side of the wall, and he's sitting in boardrooms and having meetings with people who are on 3-month contracts or 6-month contracts, who are just happy to be working and are afraid to lose their job if they say anything negative or bring any kind of criticism whatsoever. So it's not a fair, safe working environment. These are not my thoughts. This is just a lot of what's been coming out, right? And it's whether it's at the CBC or at IBM. I mean, it happens all over, in all kinds of workplaces, in schools. I had an experience that I can talk about. I won't, but a lot of us have had to deal with something like this, and it's not just in media or at the CBC. And the great thing, like Darcy said, is people are now discussing it, and we're putting ourselves in the place of those who are victimized.
Which is always important, because, look, I've said this before, the more sunlight...
Allegedly victimized, I guess.
The more sunlight you put on things, as long as people are fair and listening to both sides and willing to have a conversation without demonizing everybody, because I see so much demonizing.
Well, it was tough at the beginning, because he did come in with a 1,600 word essay that was, I guess...
compelling.
Well, no, but it's like the Fords, your friends
at
City Hall, whose best defense has been a strong offense, and he went on the offensive right off the bat, and I thought that was a little disappointing.
So, leaving his difficulties aside, which are going to be difficult for next time, we're going to wrap up now. One last question for you each, because to me, it comes back to your knowledge, not mine. Darcy, optimistic or pessimistic about the future of arts and culture in Toronto?
I am always optimistic. I think Toronto is a world-class city. I think we have amazing residents, and I think we have amazing leaders. We have some amazing institutions, and we just need to continue to work all together to create the business model and a model that will continue and to allow the government to see that they should be supporting arts and culture. Right now, right from the federal government all the way down, is making it very difficult for Toronto to thrive and become a cultural mecca, but hopefully that will change.
Manny?
Optimistic. I see the changes within the gallery system, all the new galleries that are opening, the people that are coming out to see shows. I think it's changing. It's getting better, and it's getting stronger. And Canadian artists are doing better internationally. They're getting lots of attention. I think optimistic. I think I see it getting better.
Glen?
Yeah, we're certainly not moving backwards. I just see good things ahead, and I'm optimistic about the future of arts and culture in Toronto.
See, I worry about it. See, you're all very, very positive. I worry about it when I go to these things and I see the crowds and I see this and I see the attention spans and I see how just everything now is immediate. I see all these beautiful forms of art, whether it be classical music where you take Royal Conservative.
But see, people have to stand up, and I think there will be people that will keep standing up for it. Yeah. And I think that's what we need, and I think that's the only way it's going to survive, right?
Well, gentlemen, this is a pleasure. Darcy, where can people look up website, any contact information if people want to know more?
ScotiabankContactPhoto.com.
Manny.
NeubacherShoreContemporary.com.
Perfect.
Yeah, you can follow me on social media, on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, Glen Baxter TO.
And you're good on that. You support a lot of things. Gentlemen, I really, really appreciate you all coming in. It's a pleasure.
Pleasure.
Thank you. We're going to bring in Claire now and have a serious conversation about unpaid internships. You founded and lead something called the Canadian Intern Association, correct?
That's right.
What is that, and why should people care?
The Canadian Intern Association is a federal not-for-profit. We're about 2.5 years old, and we advocate against the exploitation of unpaid interns across Canada.
Give me an example. Somebody works at McLean's, Rogers, a law firm, and doesn't get paid for it, correct?
That's right. So we deal with both academic and non-academic internships, and we try to explain to the public what the laws are and educate interns what their rights are in the workplace context.
What are the laws?
Well, generally...
And don't be a lawyer. You're on radio, you're on YouTube. There's no boring allowed. I'm a lawyer, and I try not to be boring, so no dryness.
Employment law differs from province to province, but generally, unpaid internships are illegal unless they're part of a school program.
All right. And how big of a problem and how many people does this tend to affect?
We don't know. And I've appeared twice now before the House of Commons Finance Committee to ask why Statistics Canada isn't collecting any data on this issue. So that's a real problem. We really need more information, and we have lawyers like Andrew Langell.
Hold on. No, you're live. Keep going, Claire.
We have lawyers like Andrew Langell who have come up with some estimates, like 300,000 illegal unpaid interns across Canada, but really we don't have any numbers, and that's something that we're looking to government to.
But this is so the reason I asked that number is so that, again, it's very clear that we're not talking about 500 or 5,000 people. We're talking hundreds of thousands conservatively, aren't we?
Potentially. Again, we don't have numbers.
So you're obviously, to put it simply, against this. What do you say if I was to say, I know a lot of people who have done unpaid internships, and I know you have dealt with this a million times, but let's have that conversation. That but for the fact that they got an unpaid internship, they never would have gotten a leg up, they never would have gotten, quote, in the door at whatever company or enterprise they're at, and that it's the best thing that ever happened to them. Knock that argument down.
I have done 2 unpaid internships myself, and they were both positive experiences. That's not to say that this system couldn't be improved. And also, we should not be forgetting all those people who were unable to do unpaid internships because of their financial and socioeconomic circumstances. So I fully accept that unpaid internships have been valuable for certain people, and that they may continue to be. And I don't place the burden on the intern in this case. That's the more precarious person, and they're the ones looking for experience and for a job. So if they're taking an unpaid internship, I understand that. I put the burden on the employers to say, you should be following employment laws. The least we're asking for is minimum wage for the hours interns are worked when they're entitled to it. So that's really what we're looking for, is an enforcement of minimum employment standards laws.
So I get all that, and obviously we talk about minimum wage. We're Canada. We're not slave labor. We're all that. And I get it. But there's a part of me that wonders, well, if you upset the apple cart, I know that public opinion is on your side, right? Public opinion is clearly on your side. Am I right or wrong on this?
I hope so.
Okay. And I think to myself, well, there obviously are going to be employers who exploit this. I know that, for example, there's Condé Nast in the States, which is a massive publisher that, I believe does unpaid internships. And that their balance sheet is quite healthy. And maybe it's not Condé. If Exxon, let's use an easier one. If Exxon or Petro-Canada were doing unpaid internships, that's kind of bizarre given that their profits are $8 billion per fiscal year. Mm-hmm. But what about a small enterprise that says, well, if you don't allow us to do this, we're not going to bring anybody in. And by the way, we've got 3 full-time employees here that started as unpaid interns?
The simple solution for those organizations is that they partner with an academic institution, whether that's a college or a university, and offer the unpaid internship for credit, which is under the supervision of an academic institution and where it's educational for the intern. And there just needs to be a higher burden on employers to be making sure that those internships are educational. And the schools should have more clear guidelines on what can they charge tuition for? Should they be offering reduced tuition, for example, for unpaid internships? And what sort of reporting needs to happen at the end of them?
All right, so that sounds eminently reasonable to me as a solution. Do you get blowback from employers on doing that? Working with, I mean, look, we're in Toronto. We're right next to Ryerson, a very enterprising, innovative school right now. We're near U of T. We're not even close to York. That's way up further north. But do you get blowback?
I haven't spoken to a single employer that said that they've had trouble partnering with a school program to create an internship.
So where's the resistance to this coming from?
I think it's a lack of awareness on the employer's part that there's a difference in law between an unpaid internship that's part of a school program and one that isn't.
And so yesterday I introduced you. You're an articling student at a law firm called Tork and Mains, a very well-known, prominent law firm. And good for you, by the way. You're certainly not an unpaid intern articling student there, I hope.
No, I'm not.
So the article in the paper that drew my interest was about legal aid. And a lot of people who haven't had trouble with the law think, oh, well, I'll never have it, so why do I care? But then when they get in trouble, or they need a lawyer, or they're getting divorced, or there's a dispute with their children, or they get arrested for a crime, they don't realize how important having legal representation is. There's a movement in legal aid to keep cutting what lawyers make and cutting back. The story yesterday that prominently featured you, and kudos to you as an articling student, because you don't often get a lot of big stories when you're an articling student, was that legal aid wanted to hire an articling student and not pay them $1. What say you?
Well, the important thing for the public to know is that this is part of a larger debate about whether articling should be paid or whether we should allow unpaid articling. Articling is the 10 months that law grads do after they graduate and before they can become fully licensed lawyers. So right now, it's perfectly legal to not pay an articling student, and the Law Society also permits this. However, the practice is that the vast, vast majority of articling students in Ontario are paid. The problem I have with this advertisement is that it suggests it's acceptable to not pay articling students. This is certainly distinguishable from a law student or anyone else volunteering for a legal aid clinic. There's a difference between volunteering part-time to a not-for-profit organization and working 40, probably more, hours per week for 10 months in order to get licensed to join a profession. I think that this advertisement is a slippery slope towards not paying law grads and not paying articling students at all, and I think that's extremely problematic and would result in a lot of exploitation of young people's work.
So what about, because this is part of the article, and I am a lawyer, so these things interest me. There are thousands, I think it's 2,000 people who can't find articling jobs. What do you say to them if their view is, look, if I do this, I may get a permanent job, but then doesn't that, I don't like using the word discriminate a lot. I think that word is heavily overused. That's just my personal politics. But doesn't that, in a way, if we go down this road, discriminate against sort of lower income people who can't afford, maybe they have a child, maybe they don't have a spouse or a partner who can support them. Doesn't that make a certain world completely unavailable to somebody who's lower income versus maybe somebody from Forest Hill or Rosedale who can afford to take an unpaid articling position?
Right, so this comes into the larger discussion about the law practice program. So it's a huge issue in Ontario. What are we going to do with all these law grads that don't have articles? So the Law Society has decided to institute a law practice program, and my year is the guinea pig year of that, which means a number of my colleagues are doing 4 months of further schooling after they graduate and 4 months of internship. I don't have the numbers on how many of those 4-month internships are paid. My understanding is the vast majority are. Maybe 20% are unpaid, and they're only 4 months long. I don't have an answer for the articling crisis, and I don't think very many people do. But I do not think that the answer should involve not paying people for their work, especially when they're no longer a student and they can't apply to OSAP and get student loans during that time.
So where do you see, I guess this will be my last question for you, where do you see this going in the next 5-10 years? What role do you think you can play? Because obviously to be doing this as an articling student and to be, you created this of your own volition, correct? Because you thought there was a gap in the marketplace, right?
That's right.
What are your goals in the next 5-10 years? Where do you see this going?
Well, we've already begun to prepare a number of policy proposals, and we've submitted those to the provincial government in Ontario and federally. So the main thing that I hope to see is some legislative amendments, and some of that's already happened. In Ontario recently, our occupational health and safety laws have been amended to include unpaid workers and students. So that was a huge success. I hope to see more of that happening in other provinces. Alberta is currently doing a comprehensive review of their laws. As I said, I've appeared before the Finance Committee twice to give submissions. We have an NDP private members bill on that matter federally. So I think first and foremost is going to be a lot of legislative amendments in order to accommodate this new type of worker, this intern, this student or recent graduate who's doing a transition or training period. So that's the first thing. The second thing is enforcement. I hope to see more money from the Ministries of Labour to enforce those laws and to make sure that employers are aware of what those laws are. And I guess the last thing is I hope to see more education, that young people coming out of high school and out of university have an opportunity to learn about what their workplace rights are.
Very good. Claire, people want to know more about this issue. Where can they go? What's the website?
It's internassociation.ca.
All right, Claire, thank you very much. Stay there. I'm going to go on a rant for a second before we finish. How much time do I have, Kevin? 2 minutes. So I wanted to conclude this week because if you're listening and you know that I'm interested in real issues that affect lives, obviously people are talking about the Ferguson events. It's all over the news. It's a startling story where this officer isn't even going to have to stand trial and face a jury for what he's done. It's a little bit beyond me, but as a defense lawyer, it's just something I don't get, the double standard with police and the average citizen. I am hoping, because I see that there's all these riots and looting of innocent shopkeepers, and I can't figure out how that's a response to a terrible event or the shooting of a boy or a perhaps ridiculous decision. But there is a series being written by a great reporter at the Toronto Star named Wendy Gillis, and she will be on here in the next few weeks. If any of you are at home or on your phones or at your desks, Google Wendy Gillis and a case called Eric Morgan. There's a case named Eric Morgan. Wendy Gillis wrote about it last week, about what our own Brampton police force did to frame and ruin the life of a black man in Brampton. And while I appreciate his life wasn't taken because he wasn't shot, this is a man whose life was ruined by a series of police officers literally framing an innocent man. So while I see these riots on CNN and they may be justified, and that's how you raise attention, the silence of the NRA, the gun organization, it seems to be absolutely silent on issues that affect things. That's a different rant for a different day. But I am hoping beyond hope that people realize that we are getting into a world where there are significant differences between how we treat police who abuse the rules versus the average citizen who, if they abuse the rule, they are going to be having their lives turned upside down. So if you get a chance, I'll conclude by saying Google the case of Eric Morgan, written by Wendy Gillis in the Star. It's one of the most powerful pieces of journalism you'll see this year, about how innocent lives can be ruined and how there is absolutely zero accountability for police forces in many countries, but also in our city. Thanks, everybody, for listening to The Truth. This was a great episode talking about the arts with our amazing guest. Claire, thanks for coming in, and I am really hoping you're not being paid minimum wage at Torque and Main, so get back there and get to work, because I'm sure you have 10 billable hours left for today. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.